the Oregon School Boards
She's taking
Association
off.
OSBA Governance Committee meeting on Monday, April 22nd, 2024 is called to order on 12:03. A roll call is going to be taken, and please say present if you're present. Chrissy, I believe you're present, and you had to mute and go off camera. Jackie?
Yeah, here.
Neelam? Neelam is excused. Linda?
Here.
Greg? Greg?
Yes, I'm here.
And we have Lori? Lori? Lori is absent. Jeff?
Present.
And Sonia? Sonia is, I believe, is excused. Let me see. I think I got a message from Sonia. She will be late few minutes. So they're excused until they are present. Sami, I'm here. So welcome everybody. We've got really full agenda for today. It will be predominantly the bylaws review, allocating time for the bylaws review. But before that, we will be speaking about the executive director evaluation timeline and process. That will take a shorter time period. I would like to bring to your attention the email that you have received from Linnell of the agenda and the packets. The packets include highlighted changes, proposed changes for you to review, and the minutes that we want to approve. So welcome, and let's get to work approving the agenda. The chair recognizes any motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll move to I forgot the language.
Would you like to
move to accept the agenda as presented?
It's been moved to accept the agenda as presented. I think it's in order to approve or accept. And is there a second?
I second it.
It's been seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing there is no discussion. Sorry, Linda.
I have some discussion. Could we add? Yeah, I have some discussion. Looks like we need to talk about the order of this meeting, as far as eligibility and chair. It seemed like it's ran different than, not ran different. I need to understand that chair and eligibility, basically the eligibility of this.
I'm
Talk
not
about
really
eligibility.
sure. Sorry, Linda, could you reframe the question? I'm not sure. I'm sure I understand the question. What is the question?
It's not. It wasn't a question. We're in discussion.
So I'm sorry. What's the point? Could you reiterate the point?
Eligibility.
Could you put that in a sentence, please? Eligibility of what and where? Is that a discussion item that you want to add?
It's a discussion item. Eligibility is this discussion item.
Could you, for the purpose of making sure we're clear on the proposal, and now we are in a motion to approve the agenda as presented. What's the discussion? Are you in favor of approving the agenda as presented?
I'm in favor of approving it with the addition of to discuss eligibility.
I think she's talking about 3.5.4, if I'm mistaken, because that's the source of a lot of discussion. Going back to the November 12th meeting.
So
I don't know. I don't want to speak for you, Linda. But is that what you're talking about with eligibility?
Yeah, it's eligibility altogether for. We're going to talk about bylaws, but we need to talk about eligibility too, because I'm confused on the eligibility piece, because most people on this board of directors are elected by their districts, by their region districts. So we need to talk about eligibility.
So thank you, Jeff, for the note. and thank you, Linda, for the discussion. My understanding is you want to elevate the discussion on the eligibility of members serving in one capacity or another on the board or the committees. Haley, do you have any clarification or maybe inputs around where we're at in the agenda that we already have proposed? Haley?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Linda, I just wanted to let you know that we do have that list on the agenda for the bylaws review. We're going to talk about the officers and the ex officios. So my plan was to go through the evaluation process. Hopefully that won't take us very long because we covered that last time, and hopefully we can just get that taken care of quickly and move on to the bylaws. Then I was going to go through some of the changes from last time, and then I'm assuming the bulk of the conversation today will focus on ex officios and officers. That was kind of the plan when I put the agenda together.
Okay, thank you.
Emily and then Jackie. Emily Neshek.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag in here where it says no new changes are proposed. Most of these changes in here are staff proposed changes at this point in time. So now we're hitting the part of the bylaws review where board members need to weigh on how they want to do it. But a lot of this up until this point was cleanup. And so just because it says no changes are recommended, that's just because it's from more of the staff and Bob's perspective there who's reviewed these.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jackie, and then myself.
Okay,
Jackie, you accidentally hit mute, so we can't hear you anymore. Could you repeat after I unmute? Sorry, Jackie, I don't intend to interrupt, but you are still muted. Now we can hear you.
all right, I'm assuming that when we get to the last part of the agenda where we're talking about the bylaws, that we can, there's several subjects that I think we need to consider. And I don't, do we need to just to put this in the agenda? Or just it's at number 4 of the agenda? That's not limited to anything, any particular item of the bylaws. Is that correct?
That is correct, Jackie. Thank you for that clarification. The last item on the agenda is pretty overarching into bylaws review, discussion of the elements that has been proposed by staff, or discussion of any elements that has not been proposed by staff. And also, as Haley mentioned, we have heard loud and clear in throughout the last year, including during the retreat when there was a bylaw change proposed during the September meeting, during the discussion in November, during discussions in December, during discussions from board members that we need to discuss the officers, we need to discuss ex officios and committees. So because of that, we will be allocating time for the bylaws review, including any thoughts, questions, or potential proposals for consideration around all of these items. Haley and Emily, I believe we're all on the same page on that one, correct? So with that, really appreciate the inputs and the discussion. What I am hearing from all those who contributed to the discussion is an agreement on the agenda as presented. Adding an agenda item separate is the prerogative of this committee. However, I don't think it would be necessary since agenda item 5 include bylaws review of staff recommendations or any other recommendations from the committee. So with that, is there any further discussion, or are we ready to vote on the motion to approve the agenda as presented? I believe we are ready to approve the agenda as presented. Is there any objection to approve the agenda as presented? If you object to approve the agenda as presented, please raise your hand or say I object. Seeing there's no objection, the motion passes. The next item on the agenda is approving the minutes. The chair entertains a motion to approve the March 15, 2024 OSBA Governance Committee meeting minutes as presented, or with any additions, deletions, or changes. Is there a motion? If you have a motion, please raise your virtual or physical hand to be recognized.
I move to approve the minutes.
From Sonia, move to approve the minutes. Is there a second? Feel
I'll
free to
second, yeah.
unmute and it's been seconded by Greg first. Thank you, Greg. Greg, so we have motion to approve and a second. Is there any discussion on the minutes, on the motion? The discussion is, there's no discussion. Is there any objection? Sorry, go ahead.
Skip, I have,
Yes.
sorry, I'm a
Linda,
little late. I'm reading
No
the
worries.
minutes. I had to go back and try to find what it said that the I was looking at something about the evaluation and I thought we had, it said June 2025. It's the June 2025 meeting. And by June 31st, 2025 provisions for the review of the changes. Just give me some clarification that our evaluation, that the evaluation we talked about for the executive director will be extended till December 2024 and not June, because she was going to work on her goals.
All right, thank you for that question. Sorry, go ahead.
It was to extend it to this June 2024 because she was going to work on her goals. And I think what I'm looking at, it's saying till 2025.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So the question is regarding the last paragraph of item Roman numeral 3 on the minutes. And the question is it June 25 or is it June 24? I will pause for some time for staff to review your question and if they're ready for a response, if it is as intended, the 25 or 24. Or if staff would like us, we can table this so we can further review and provide a response.
Yeah, you could. I'm okay with that. I mean,
I would prefer if we could have time to look at that and make sure the dates are accurate. It looks like maybe that should say 2025 instead of 2024, but.
Yeah. Okay.
well. Yeah, and I don't see it in here saying December 2024. So yeah, that needs to be revisited. Clarification. That's good.
Thank you for that clarification. So while we do have a motion, Bob, help me out. Should we have a motion to table while we have a motion to approve, or just vote down the motion to approve for now and then motion to table?
And I'm sorry, I just stepped out to grab my copy, so I missed if
So
there's a motion on the table.
Yeah, where we are right now, we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented, and there was a question that will need the staff to review the minutes. So my proposal to the committee is to table this item, and we don't approve the minutes, and we review it, and we'll bring it back. So while we have a motion on the table, how would you advise to move forward? And Jackie, I'll recognize you after that.
Well,
Going to move to table.
there you go.
Move to table.
Okay.
This
We move to
item.
table. Thank you. We move to table by Jackie. Is there a second?
I second move to table.
All right. Is there any discussion to move to table the minutes? Approving the minutes. Seeing there's no discussion on approving the minutes, is there any objection? If you object, raise your hand or say I object. Seeing there's no objections, the motion to table the minutes has been approved. So we will review, staff will pull the minutes and we'll review them. We'll provide a clarification or any changes in the following meeting. Next item on the agenda is related to the executive director evaluation timeline and process. Haley will have some feedback for us to review. Haley.
Thank you. Okay, so if you recall the last time I brought forward a process that was based on an evaluation process that looks like it's been done for several years. I made some suggested edits to it. We went over those last time. Emily has agreed to waive her evaluation for this year because we don't have goals for her yet established. So the plan was to implement this timeline at the June 2024 meeting. Emily will bring her goals to that meeting. And this process will continue over the next from June 2024 to June 2025, and the evaluation will be in June 2025. Linnell, do you want to share the screen so I can walk everyone through? So the last time I brought you a red line version, I removed all the red lines and only highlighted those pieces that we changed from the last time, and we made changes in accordance with the discussion that we had last time about questions and concerns. So the first one here, we just put clarifying language in here that the executive director's evaluation will be based on her goals that she establishes. So I think we all understood that, but just made that clear here in the language that you will be evaluating, the board will be evaluating her based on her goals that she brings. Emily volunteered last time that she would review her goals with the board at every regular meeting over the following year. So that is the second line here that we added here that's highlighted, that she will do that. When I was preparing for this meeting today, I noticed that the third line, and Linnell, can you scroll down a bit? So the January 2025 line there, I think we can actually delete that because it's a mid-year status report, but she'll be giving an update at every regular board meeting. So that just seems redundant. Unless anybody has any concerns about that. And I'll just go through all of these changes. And then if anyone has any questions and concerns, we can address that after I've kind of reviewed the changes. So Linnell, if you want to go down to the next highlighted portion at the end there. The last time, Sammy had some concerns about and questions about whether the contract needs to come back to the full board. So basically what this process outlines is at the June meeting in 2025, if there are any changes to the acting executive director's contract, the board will vote on that at the June meeting, and then whatever they vote on, the president at that time will take that new contract language to outside legal counsel and have it reviewed to make sure it's legally sufficient. And if there are no substantive changes recommended by outside legal counsel, then the board president will sign the new contract on behalf of the board. And it clarifies that the new contract would only have to come back to the full board for approval if there's something substantive change. So to give you an example, if in June 2025, the board says, okay, we're going to give the executive director a 2% increase in pay, there's a vote at that board meeting to do so. There's a vote to delegate to the president the authority to implement that 2% increase. We go to outside legal counsel. There's no recommendation to change anything. Just give the 2%. So the president would put that in writing, sign it, put it in the personnel file, and it would not have to come back to the board again because the board already authorized it in a public meeting and authorized the president to sign that new contract addendum. It probably wouldn't even require a new contract, just an addendum to the contract if the only thing changing is the pay. So that's just kind of an example of what that would look like. In the prior process, it had the president meeting with the executive director one-on-one in August and signing an evaluation. And I tried to clarify this process so that the board is fully involved in the evaluation process and any changes to the contract, and that the board would make those changes in a public meeting, and then the president would sign any necessary documentation so that it ended up in the personnel file with a signature from the board president. So those are the new things that we added since last time to try to address the questions from last time. And I see that there are some questions. Sammy, I don't know if you want me to, if you want to call on people for questions.
If your window makes it easier for you to navigate who you want to call on, feel free to handle that.
Okay, I can do that. Greg?
So using the example that you used on the contract, a substantive change would be, say, the president then says, no, I think we'll bump that to 3.
Correct, yes. The
And
president,
that would not fly with the board. That would have to be something that had to be brought back to the board to be changed. But I can understand that if it was not non-substantive, it would just be clerical things or changes to language or something like that. But anything of any big importance would have to come back to us.
correct. You are correct, Greg. The president would not have authority to do something different than what was approved by the board in a public meeting. Linda?
I think that's what, yes, I second what Greg was saying. Sound like this to previous processes, make it very clear. Things must come to the board and be approved by the board to eliminate further actually just to eliminate further transparency. I mean, not eliminate further just to be transparency because due to the situation we're at. But to the board has supervising authority, and so does the executive director, the executive committee. But I second what Greg had just made clear.
Thank you, Linda. Yes, I think that we need to make sure it's very clear that the president doesn't have the authority to do anything beyond what the board authorizes the president to do. Jeff?
Yeah, I asked this question of Bob during our January meeting and I couldn't get an answer. So hopefully we can get a clear explanation here. But my question goes back to, we say we have to go to the full board, but it seems like there's also this commonality that the executive committee could do a lot of things without the full board's approval. And I guess that's my question is, when is there a flow chart or when is it reasonable that the executive committee can just make their own decisions and do those things without letting the board know? Because it seems like that also is a process. And is that something that can be done here? Or is that just something that can be done in certain situations?
So when we review the bylaws, there is a section in there that addresses the executive committee's authority. So I think that maybe we should have that particular discussion when we get to that bylaw.
Okay, is that something that could, well, I guess, yes, but in the context of this would still have to go to the full board. That's just, can it be approved by the executive committee is, I guess, my question.
Correct. So this process, the plan is to bring this to the board this coming June. The board would vote on this, and assuming that they vote on this process, this is the process that has to be followed. The executive committee cannot make up some other process or do something different than what the full board authorizes.
Perfect, thank you. And then I'll look forward to the other part later, but that was my concern, is that this is one of those situations where they could just do it without letting the full board know.
Yeah, no, the executive committee would not have authority to change this process once adopted by the board. Sammy?
Can I jump in? I actually want to delineate that, because my understanding of the bylaws, the only time the executive committee cannot act on behalf of the board when it is explicitly mentioned, not in process, not in policy, but explicitly mentioned in bylaws. So theoretically, and I would assume the executive committee presently and in the future would not want to do that, but theoretically, this is still not a bylaws process. So for possibly an extenuating circumstances, the board cannot meet for whatever reason during a period of time, the executive committee very well may have the authority and the delegation by the bylaws to act on behalf of the board and still inform the board in the next meeting within this process. Is my understanding correct? And I know we might go through the rabbit hole where we need to table this to the next discussion, but I just want to make sure that we address Jeff's concern. That's there might be actually a way for the executive committee that they need to step in here still, because it's only in the bylaws that say only if it is a bylaw stated responsibility of the board, you can take it by the executive committee. Am I right here?
I think you're probably right. There may be some circumstances where the executive committee would have authority to do that, but we would need to analyze that on a case by case basis and consult with legal counsel about whether whatever particular thing is happening. But for the most part, once the board adopts this process, this is the process we'll be following unless the board changes that process.
Correct. Thank you.
Jeff?
And just a point of clarification, since there is a kind of genuine lack of trust with the executive committee, can I just ask that even if bylaws allow this to happen without the board, I highly suggest that that board notification occurs sooner than later and not like a month after the fact. So that's the only thing that I ask is communications really for the full board is as transparent and as expedited as possible.
Thank you. Jackie?
What I'm suggesting is that in number 4, that we have a discussion, because there's some other concerns about the executive committee. And I think we need to take care of the evaluation process first and finish the agenda, and then go to further discussion on eligibility and the exec committee and other things. That's my suggestion.
Thank you, Jackie. Neelam? Neelam, do you have a comment?
Sorry, it took me a moment to get off of mute, and apologies. And then I hear an echo. All right. I just wanted to say that I can appreciate that, we are operating in difficult times. And I just want to say I have confidence in the executive committee. I feel that, we've got really great people on the executive committee, and I just wanted to share that I have a lot of confidence in them.
Thank you. Linda, did you have another comment?
Second, what Neelam is saying about confidence in the executive committee, there are some confidence in the executive committee. I have to agree and add to. I have some confidence in some of the executive committee, and I do understand things are difficult, but at no time will a sole decision be made by the executive committee when there's opportunity to reach out to the board, whether it's by email or what. Whether it's by email or phone call, because that has been done. They call phone, email, but there are exigent circumstances. And if that urgent exigent circumstance require that, then they still need to notify the board right away. And I personally would like to, I know it's not always perfect, the world's not always perfect, that even in exigent circumstances, notifying the board right away, the board may, certain parts of the board may disagree, and it might be something that we need to step back and reevaluate, but the board needs to be included. OSBA Board of Director is part of leadership, OSBA leadership. They are OSBA leadership.
Thank you, Linda. So on the executive director evaluation timeline and process that I've set forward, are there any changes to that process anyone would like? Any questions about the changes I've suggested there? If not, we can move on to the bylaws.
I would assume, Haley, there's no objection to January 2025 to be eliminated, with understanding that we're going to be doing regular updates in every board meeting. Hearing no objection, there's no objection, we'll eliminate that line. And still, we're going to make a final action as this committee in a following meeting, correct?
Correct. I'll bring it back to our May meeting and we can finalize that.
Perfect. And I'll let you, Haley, take it for the bylaws. And just I want to ask the committee to really give grace to each other on this, where we give equal weight for the reviews and revisions. We may want to spend more time on specific provisions, and I want to recognize that. But for the importance and critical aspects of those bylaws, let's make sure we cover as much as we can. And we elevate where we agree, we elevate where we have proposals that needs review, that we can review them in a following meeting. So I'll let Haley lead that process, and let's start with reviewing staff updates, asking questions about staff updates, then providing recommendations on staff updates, and then probably providing further recommendations or questions or any reviews you want to see that we have not seen yet, including the discussion around officers, board members, and ex officios. Does that sound good for everybody? Linda, please go ahead.
Haley is going to lead this, correct? Haley is leading. You just said, I think you said Haley is leading this. Okay,
That's correct.
I'm ready for Haley. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Haley, take it over.
Thank you. All right, so we obviously looked at this once before the last time, and I sent this off to Bob, and he took a look at it and made some suggestions, and so we have those suggestions in this version now. And we highlighted the things that are new from last time. We still have all the red line in here, so you can see all of the changes that we are proposing, but the ones that are highlighted are the ones that are new since last time. So I'm going to just kind of walk through them all at once, kind of the changes we're suggesting, and then I'll ask if there are any questions about those suggested revisions. And then after we've kind of completed that, we can open it up for discussion on maybe more changes or other questions that board members have about officers and ex officios and that sort of thing. So the first change here, 2.3, this is not a substantive change. It just adds in a cross reference there so that when you're reading that, you know that there's another section that's related. We've tried to make this a little bit more user friendly so that when we're looking at answering questions, we know all of the provisions we need to look at, because sometimes there are multiple provisions that apply to a particular thing. And for this, there was, so we added in a reference to 4.1.3G. Moving down to the next one, 2.5.2. We just deleted that altogether because it's already stated in section 2.9. And so basically we have the same language in two different places, which causes confusion when you're trying to look at this. And also, if we ever make changes to that provision in the future, we have to remember that there are two provisions that say the same thing and make sure we're updating both in the same manner. So this will just help us keep things clean going forward. 3.5. This is the section that talks about the composition of the board of directors. And it has the statement at the end about ex officio advisors. We are suggesting deleting this. This is not a substantive change because ex officios are described in 3.5.4. Actually, it might be 3.9 now. That might have changed, but no, it's 3.5.4. So there's no reason to have this here because ex officios are advisors. They aren't a board of directors. So it just makes it clearer in the language. And when we get down to 3.5.4, you can see And so scroll down to 3.5.4. So this is the section that talks about the ex officio. So it's just in its own section. So it doesn't need to be up at the top of there. It just adds confusion. And then we're going to come back to this section and talk about our questions are, do we want to have this many ex officios? Do we want to put parameters around ex officios, how many meetings they attend, that sort of thing. We have quite a few. If you kind of look at the language here, there are the possibility for a lot of ex officios, and not all of these people show up to our meetings. And what do we do if they don't come? Do we invite them? Do we reach out? And the people in these positions change year after year sometimes. So who is it that's responsible for being on top of that? And I know, Sammy, you emailed us about one of these people being incorrect, I think, on our website. And so questions like that, how are we handling the ex officios? Who's communicating with them? And so forth. So we'll come back to that. 3.6, I think, is our next one. We are just adding president here in addition to immediate past president. So if the position is vacant, then we can appoint, you all can appoint members to fill those vacancies. And this just clarifies that if the president or immediate past president already has a second person from their region in accordance with 3.5.1E, then there wouldn't be an appointment to that position because there's already someone from that region. I think that was what was intended here. And so we're just cleaning that language up to make that clear. 3.9, just making it clear that the board can set a regular meeting schedule. That's been past practice to set a regular meeting schedule, but it isn't entirely clear in the language of the bylaws. So we made that clear that, we can set a regular schedule and have regular meetings, and then all the other meetings that are not regular are special. And I see that Greg has his hand up, so I'm going to stop. Greg, do you have a question or concern?
Yeah, the question about 3.5.4, the one line says that one of the ex officios will come from the State Board of Education, yet a lot of times we refer to it as the ODE. And I'm wondering which is the most proper, the Oregon Department of Education or the State Board of Education? What is the more proper term? And if we use ODE in other places, then maybe we should have this say Oregon Department of Education.
Okay, thank you, Greg. I'll definitely.
It's under the letter G there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I see that. Thank you. We'll look into that.
Thank you.
See what would be more appropriate. Okay, so we just talked about 3.9. Let's go down to 3.10. This is just clarifying that when a special meeting is scheduled, it is scheduled for a particular purpose, and no other matter will be considered at that special meeting other than the one that it was scheduled for. If somebody wants to have another special meeting on another topic, they would have to follow the process for establishing a special meeting on that topic. So that was just to clarify that is the case. That's the way it has worked, and so that's the way it should work, and we wanted to make sure that was clear in here. 4.1. And Greg, your hand is still up. Do you have a different question or comment, or did you?
No, I'm just I'll get it out of there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
4.1, standing committees. Clarify the language so that it's clear that the executive committee can act on behalf of the board when necessary between board meetings. This amendment aligns with previous interpretation of this provision, and I understand from our discussion earlier that this might be a section that you all want to look at. But this is what we're recommending. We can come back to that if folks have other ideas for that section. 4.1.2. We clarified who has 2-year terms here because on the finance committee, the secretary, treasurer, and vice president and the president are all on the finance committee, but they are only in those positions for 1 year. So it didn't make sense that this said they were there for 2 years. So we clarified who actually does have 2-year terms. So that's what that language was intended to do, to make that more clear, who has 2-year terms as opposed to just 1 year. 4.1.4 is PACE. PACE is listed under, the way it currently is set up, PACE is listed under the committee section, and PACE is not a committee, it's a trust. It's a separate legal entity. So we moved this from the committees to a new section 7, and we'll see that at the very end of the document, but it just isn't appropriate to have it under the committee heading because it's not a committee, it's a trust. It's something different than a committee. 5.3.
Sorry, can I raise my hand for that one?
Yes.
Is there anywhere in the bylaws where we, for lack of better words, enshrine PACE Board of Trustees as a subdivision of OSBA, or is striking this may lead into inadvertent separation between the two entities? And I'm thinking, Helly, about the situation between COSA and COSA, the Coalition of School Attorneys, and NSBA. That's a very similar relationship I can think of, and I want to make sure that's still maintained if we strike this.
Yes, so we struck it from up there, but we just cut and pasted it down below into section 7 and then recommended some changes here, but I think it's still clear. The board of directors shall appoint the trustees of the OSBA Property and Casualty Coverage for Education Trust. So it still has OSBA with full authority to appoint those board members. So I don't think we've unintentionally kind of separated the entities in an inappropriate way. And this was part that we had Bob look at too. He actually helped a lot with this part, so.
Yeah, I would just add that that's also memorialized in the PACE trust agreement itself.
The trust agreements between both entities, correct?
The trust agreement establishing PACE.
Got it. Perfect. That makes sense. Then no concerns. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, if you want to go back up to 5.3. So here we just separated compensation out into its own paragraph because it was compensation and term of office. So we just separated those for ease of reading into 2 different paragraphs there. And then in the compensation section, we clarified that this applies to officers because board of director reimbursement is in another provision already, which is 3.1.5. So this section on compensation is just for officers, and then board of directors reimbursements is in a different section. Sammy.
Question about the separation and if it has any implications. I want to bring the historical context of my involvement as a president of the caucus. I was able to travel to meet with caucus members during the legislative roadshow, and I'm wondering if the separation will change that. If we want to put that somewhere in the bylaws, or leave it to the discretion of the executive director based on finances, based on the year and the budget. So I just want to elevate that for probably your reflection and any recommendations around that for the presidents of the caucuses reimbursement for those legislative roadshows. And in my situation, I was reimbursed by OSBA rather than by the caucus for those trips.
All right, I have made a note to look into that. Linda?
That was just a point of clarification because Sammy went around a lot on this road show in this last year, and Sammy, was that in the capacity of the caucus or in the capacity of the past elected president?
Yeah, thank you for the
President-elect. It was president-elect, I think you were in. It wasn't the caucus, right?
Thank you for the question. So to answer the question, what year are we? 24. In 2022, I was a president of the caucus, and I traveled for a few legislative roadshow trips as a caucus president. And OSBA leadership at the time approved my travel as from OSBA. So it was not on the budget of the caucus. And in 2023, I traveled as an officer on behalf of the president, or as an officer, I was allowed to travel to meet with every stop in the roadshow. So to answer your question, last year it was as president-elect and as an officer. The year before that, as a caucus president. And so I just want to make sure for future leaderships, whether it's officers and caucuses, we're clear on the intention and how we were navigating that.
You were paid for by OSBA, correct?
Reimbursed by OSBA. Yes.
Okay,
in both
gotcha.
cases. That's correct.
Emily, are you addressing that particular issue?
Yeah, I just wanted to flag that I think it would be my recommendation that we leave this general as it's addressed in policy as well.
Perfect.
More specifically, which feels more appropriate than being more prescriptive in the bylaws.
Agreed.
Jackie?
I'm not clear as to the mileage reimbursement for attending meetings. Is that still part of our policy? Because like our last meeting, usually we would get a slip and then we would just put in our mileage for that meeting. And that hasn't been happening. And I don't know if it's an oversight, or are we being reimbursed, or what is the policy on that?
Emily?
Yeah, you are reimbursed for all of your travel for the board meetings, and I believe that Linnell sends out communications getting that information for you all to be able to submit for reimbursement.
It would be easier for us, and I didn't have a conversation with Linnell about it, that if we just had the slips there when we're at the meeting, we don't have to make in. So that's it. That's all that's all.
Linda, did you have something?
No, thank you. Sorry, I let my hand down.
Okay. Okay, so let's see. We went through 5.4 and then we've got 5.6. Okay, so here we just added in the committees that are being referenced for clarity. So this talks about the president serving as an ex officio voting member of all committees, and the way it's currently written, it says ex officio voting member of all committees, and then the sentence ends, and we just clarified established under sections 4.1 and 4.2 of these bylaws so that it's clear which committees we're talking about there. And that was the end of our suggested changes. We had 7 at the end, which is PACE, which we already looked at. And then other than that, those were our recommended changes. So we've had some questions, comments as we were going through. Any questions or comments about these changes before we kind of open it up for more general conversation? Sammy?
Yeah, thank you, Haley. I think I want to actually highlight 5.6.3. There is a substantive change there. Personally, I believe it's a really good idea, but I want to make sure we walk through the scenario and we're clear of the ramifications of it.
No,
sorry. So far we are at vice president. In absence of the president-elect, the vice president shall assume the powers and duties of president-elect. So the vice president would be president-elect, acting president-elect, and if that happens, now you have a 3-tier line of succession, basically, which lends to the question: in the following annual election, do we still, the way I read it, we still have to have that person, the vice president and the president-elect, the acting president-elect, to stand for an election for president-elect before they assume the duties of the president. So I think that's how I see it. And maybe since we're doing this anyway, if that's the intention of the committee, maybe we need to delineate it. If this happens actually after the election, the incoming president-elect might be more suitable to assume those duties, or should we stay with the vice president assuming those duties until the end of the year? And did I lose you, or did you lose me with my comments?
I'm reading it and trying to understand the comment.
And I
Yeah.
think one thing that I can say at the outset is that that's not a substantive change, just to be clear. The change to 5.6.3 is not substantive. It's just clarifying that it's the vice president who will do that. And so to the extent that there's some sort of procedural issue that could happen in some confluence of circumstances where people are leaving at different times of the year, that's always been the case. I don't think you necessarily have to deal with all of those sorts of permutations in the bylaws. But if the group wants to do that, then I think you need to give direction on what you want to happen in certain circumstances.
So if I may ask a question, Bob, as it stands right now with this clarification, we will continue to hold an election for president-elect during the year where a president-elect may vacate or their position is absent, or they may vacate. Well, this one is absence, not the vacation, not becoming vacant, right?
Correct. It says in the absence. Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies it. Sorry. I'll take away all of my comments, so that makes it very clear for me. Thank you.
Greg?
Yeah, that's just what I was going to talk about is whether, if the president-elect does not return, then is the vice president then the president-elect, or do we have to put that through, as Sammy stated? Do we put that through as a new election for the president-elect? That's just what I would want to know.
All right, I'll make a note to look into whether or not the bylaws already address that scenario. And if not, then I can bring something back to the next meeting. Sammy, do you have a new comment?
No further comments.
Any other questions, concerns about these suggestions that I just went over? Or are we ready to start talking about other concerns at this time? All right. Linnell, do you want to end share screen for a moment? We may come back and look at specific things, but I will open it up to questions, concerns generally about bylaw provisions that any committee member wants to talk about. Ex officio, officer, any provisions. And what I'm hoping is that we will hear different ideas, and then we can come back at the next meeting with maybe some suggested language to address those concerns that we kind of hear today. And Jackie, I think I saw your hand first. Jackie?
Okay, I'm just going to list the several issues that I'm concerned about, and then we can decide when, through the discussion, what we want to do first. One of my concerns is the agenda setting how we go about it. And when it's set. The other concern is, and it's not just ex officio, but I just think there's nothing in our bylaws that talks about eligibility to be an officer. And I think that's what has been a problem, that it talks about officers, but never who can be an officer. The other is, again, the executive committee authority. And my concern is what happened with Jim and negotiations, and why we're going into negotiations or not. And I want to be very careful about not doing something that's executive session. And then the next one is caucuses. I think it just is, we need to start looking at the caucuses. What we have one that's been, I don't know, since 2019 maybe. And the other one is new. And I think that we need to have to really look, before we decide to have any more, we need to take a look at what has occurred, audited budgets, and goals and objective for the future, current budgets. And lastly, Zoom meeting protocol. In our board, we have people who are at our meetings and they don't show themselves. And we have rules on how people behave in person, but we have no rules for anybody that's on Zoom that's not in person. And in my board, I'd like to know who's in my, and it's something I've talking about in my district. And that's not a popular, they say we have to just have them however they want to be there. Well, I don't think when we have anybody in person, they don't get to decide how how they behave in our meetings. So those are my key issues to discuss, but I don't want to take any more time.
Jackie, I have a clarifying question. When you're talking about agenda setting, are you talking about the OSBA board meetings?
No, I'm talking about our governance meetings. And because I kind of think that maybe when we get done at the end of our meetings, we could set the agenda for the next meeting so that we have, so that we're actually, if somebody has some things that they want to make sure that's on the agenda or something that's finished or whatever, that we contribute that information, at the end of the meeting, if anybody wants to.
Thank you, Jackie. Haley, with permission, I'll comment on that. As I understand it, the governance committee, the chair of the committee and staff drive the agenda, but for purposes of transparency, just we have enshrined it in our, sorry, I'm hearing my echo, so I can't hear my, Jackie, do you need muting? Thank you. So for the, I'll start from the top. So my understanding is for the governance committee, agenda setting is driven by the chair of the committee and the staff. However, for purposes of transparency and driving business by the membership as well, just like how we enshrined the agenda setting for the full board in January through a process that goes through the executive committee, that's deliberated by the executive committee, and the executive committee at the end of their meetings elevates any agenda item requests for considerations for the executive committee and respectively for the full board. I would be in favor of, for the good of the order, agenda item at the end of our governance committee. So for the members of this committee to elevate other priorities, and then we would set it. Haley, does that align with what our policies, bylaws, and historical performance of the governance committee, or are we going to go outside the tradition? Any comments on the comments are from Jackie and maybe where we can move forward?
I think it's probably acceptable for us to have, an item at the end of the meetings so that we can talk about what's going to be on the next agenda. Historically, I'm not really sure because I haven't been in charge of the governance committee until this year. But I'm happy to kind of look through what has been done in the past and figure that out. But I think it's a good idea to allow input into that process.
Sounds good. Emily?
Yeah, just wanted to add part of what's also driving the agenda is we're doing a lot of policy work as well, and a lot of it is interconnected. So we're trying, Haley and Spencer and I are spending a lot of time figuring out what comes first and what needs to be addressed first so that the policy work isn't put on hold while we do the bylaws work. So that's also kind of the puzzle piece that we're trying to fit together here.
Yeah, and to comment on that, thank you, Emily. Really, this committee drives so much work, including the policy committee work and the full organization. With that, I want to really encourage us, whether as board members or as governance committee members, if you have a future agenda that you want to discuss, please write it down in an email and send it to me and to Emily and Haley. Or either one of us. That will help us really do some planning and make sure if there's overlap between agenda items, we do the homework around any staffing, any updates, and maybe clarifying questions for the person proposing the agenda. So all board members are informed, and also we can provide prioritization based on what's driving the agenda in terms of timeline for approving bylaws, etc. So I would like to recommend that while we don't have an agenda item at the end of today, you have my commitment. If you send me an email about an agenda item proposal, I'll make sure we consider it seriously and we prioritize it accordingly with the priorities that we need to do for the full organization. Back to you, Haley.
Thank you. Jeff, sorry, thank you for patiently waiting.
Well, actually, I know that's there, but I know Chrissy hasn't talked, so I want to give her a chance. And can I go after Chrissy?
Sure. Chrissy?
So I sort of have a question about agendas for just the regular meeting, and I'm gonna be a little ignorant here. So when I am running, my local board meeting, at the very beginning of the meeting, I say, are there any revisions to the agenda? And then, we have an opportunity to add something if it needs to be added or take something away. I'm not sure what our policy is for the OSBA Board of Directors because it's been done so many different ways. So is there a policy around how things are added? Can they be added in a moment or can they not? And who gets to decide that? Because I'm seeing it done a lot of different ways and I don't know the policy, and that's my fault.
Do you want me to answer that? So according to the overarching Robert's Rules of Order, it allows the body to add agenda items. However, there is some expectations in the bylaws and in public meeting law on what you can add and what you cannot add, and whether an action is allowed or not. In our working agreements that the board have signed off on in January, it does explicitly ask for no surprises. Agenda items have to go through a process through the executive committee. And in January also, we approved a process to propose agenda items to the executive committee by emailing the officers or the executive director. And based on it, the executive committee will consider those agenda items proposals. And Greg, sorry to point to you, but you have a great example. Greg proposed an agenda item, and that agenda item now is carried by the executive committee for consideration for more work. And whether proposing it for an action or proposing it for a research or proposing it for this consideration by the full board will be the purview of the executive committee. So the the guiding documents on adding or not adding agenda items is governed by the working agreement that does not allow adding agenda items at the spot. And also the process to add agenda items to the board meeting is done through a process that we have we have approved in January. And with permission, I'll ask staff to maybe share it with members of the committee, both the working agreements and the process of adding agenda items that we approved in January. It's available in the packets, but we can send it, so it can supplement my comments. Is there anything inaccurate or any changes, any clarifications, Haley, Emily, or Bob, you want to say to my answer?
I don't have anything to add, and yes, we can resend that to the committee, those documents. Jeff, back to you.
Sounds good. I think that there's two things I want to address, and one is a follow-up after that with Sammy. But I think that your comment, Haley, that said ex officio are advisors, not a director, really concerns me when we consider who's an officer. And that's not anything against our current situation, but I think we really need to address, do we want advisors to be the president or the vice president of our organization? Because those are really important roles, especially when I think about the LPC. So I think at some point, either if it's going to be on 3.54 or if we're going to go back to the officer part, really designate that they are advisors, they're not directors. Because I think when you said that, I think that's what most people thought. And I think that's what the era of a lot of confusion was back in November was. Actually, it wasn't even that, it was back in July and then also in August. So that's one thing I think that'd be great. And then the second thing I would say, and this is a situation when Linda requested her special meeting, the process where we actually talk about how do we get the 20% of the board to request a meeting. When it was a reply all, I know that, and I completely understand why Emily shut down that meeting or that thread, because it is a reply all and it could be perceived as a serial meeting, but the bylaw isn't clear on how you actually can get those people on board to request that meeting. And so I think that whether it's a policy or the bylaw just makes clear that board members requesting a meeting is not outlined anywhere, and it's really confusing. And it really seems like it's also situational right now. And I think that that's something that does need to be clarified. And I guess my concern with the final statement was Sammy keeps on referring back to our working agreements. But I haven't attended a meeting where the working agreements have been enforced. So we're going to continue saying the working agreements are there, the board agreed to these working agreements. I guess my concern is that also seems situational. And those are only brought in when it's certain people talking, but when it's other people talking, it's never addressed. And so I guess that's my concern is, and I guess actually goes back to what Bob mentioned, and we have these working agreements and we have these bylaws and we have these policies, but none of them really can be enforced because it seems ultimately that every board member has free speech and they can say whatever they want at the meetings. And I guess that's my concern is, if that's going to be our overarching thing is these working agreements, then the hard part is that either they have no enforcement or they're just not dealt with unilaterally. So those are my concerns that hopefully we can have some sort of clarification on.
Thank you. Greg?
Yes, I had a question. We have policy committee, we have a finance committee, we have a governance committee. There's various different committees. How is it in our agreements that is who chairs those? Is it an automatically that we have executive committee members that chair all of those? Or what I would like to know is, in our normal local board, any board committees elect their own chair and their own vice chair, and they are the ones who push through the agenda and ask for input in the agenda for those committees. And my question is, do we have a process here where we can elect our own chair, or is it already an automatic from an executive committee member?
Thank you, Greg. I just looked at the bylaws quickly, and in the bylaws, it doesn't look like there is any information about who chairs each committee. And I don't know if that's in a policy. I'd have to look and see if that's in somewhere else. Oh, Sammy, you know?
Yeah, I think it is in the bylaws, and I can't pull that over, so. The president is the ex officio presiding officer of the governance committee. It is somewhere in the bylaws, either under president or under the committee itself. I think it's under the committee themselves. I want to say it's either bylaws or policy.
It's in 5.6.1.
Yeah.
Thank you. And it reads. So yeah, so it's designated there. And again,
They have to
So
take
you're
the-
saying,
have-
that 5.6.1 has to do with committees?
You
It
know, I
says
have-
it only says that they shall be an ex officio voting member. It doesn't say they will be the presider of the
Yeah.
committees.
And I was trying to take it back as you were saying that, because you are correct.
It
It's not-
says that they
it's
are,
not-
they'll preside at all the member meetings of the association, but it doesn't have anything, there's no language in there saying that they are the presider of the committees.
Greg, I'll add this to the list of things to just see if there's somewhere else that has that information in it, maybe a policy or a guideline or something. And if not, maybe that's something this governance committee wants to think about creating as a process for that, if it doesn't already exist somewhere.
I appreciate it.
Linda?
So looks like a lot of my questions has been brought up by Greg, the chair. The concern was the chair, the ex officio as advisors, our director. I first seen from experience of ex officio, even at OSBA board when I came on, they were liaisons to just hear our discussions and carry back to their board what OSBA has done. They were liaisons. So that I would love to have some clarification on that. And Robert's rule, we really need to clear up our concerns that folks have about agenda and who has the authority to set the agenda and when can we ask that an item be added to the agenda, because sometimes things come up last minute, but I feel like when people's bringing up agenda, they get pushed back. And then you want to do this. I sort of, we run ours like Chrissy mentioned, they run their meeting. You want to add an item at the meeting, you ask that when it comes to consent agenda, you ask that the item be added. And, we don't want, like Sammy said, we don't want any extreme surprises, but when you avoid dealing with certain things that needs to be put on the agenda that should have been put on the agenda, as you would know, more than once I brought up unfinished business. And this whole thing on eligibility, we had to, eligibility officers and ex officio, we now had to ask that this be added to the agenda when that was said to be done in September 2023 at our retreat. And here we are going over bylaws and we are asking that be added when it should have already been. So I still like to make sure that there is a process that we know about these agendas and that a lot of the roadblock on whether we should consider or whether there should be consideration, those are roadblocks. And a lot of this is strategies to alleviate addressing issues. Our working agreement should be at every board meeting. I can't say everybody does that, but we got new peoples there, and those working agreements should not be made available. We wanted to make them available, and we have to be willing to hear the voice of all, even when it's uncomfortable. Be willing to hear the voice of all and quit. I feel like sometimes that we want to move forward, but they're only on certain things. We're pushing out a personal agenda for some versus being there to hear the agendas that folks have brought up that should have been on the agenda from President of 2023, passed on to President now, and sometimes it just go on, maybe to the next
Linda,
president,
may I
President-elect,
interrupt?
President-elect. I'm talking,
Linda.
Sammy, I don't interfere with you. Just let me finish my
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
points.
Please go ahead, but please go
I'm
ahead.
not mentioning name. I'm saying,
Sounds
I'm
good.
saying,
Sounds
excuse
good.
me, I'm
We
saying
agree. We
president,
agree. We are.
president, yeah, I'm not mentioning names. So, because some of this stuff do get passed on, you know, president, past president, current president, and then the next president-elect might pick it up. So, but we have to keep those unfinished business on the agenda and have our working agreements before us to remind us we're there to hear the voices of all.
Sure. If I may, I'm gonna take the space right now to provide an important clarification here. I read the room, and I think I'm reading the room. Building trust is a responsibility of every individual of an organization. And as your servant, my personal agenda is making sure we're all successful serving the kids. The working agreements is the responsibility of every person on the board. I ask for your advice, your help, and your support when the working agreement is not enforced in any meeting, any correspondence, any committee meeting that you raise that. Just like we always are, I believe that the meeting is the responsibility of the full board through each individual member. So to the comments that has been shared so far, I want to just make sure we provide our collective commitment. The working agreements applies to all of us all the time, and the responsibility of raising that is on each one of us. And I ask for your assistance when you see that there is a need to elevate the working agreement element to be recognized or to be enforced. Please raise that as a privileged motion. And I'm going to make sure as your servant, presiding officer, that your recognition of the working agreement element is enforced in the meeting. Okay, so I just want to make sure that's clear. In terms of eligibility and officers, I want to share the timeline, and I think it has been shared multiple times. I was very keen on making sure information is shared with committee members and board members. Since day one, I recognize it's important to be shared. There are some details that has been shared with the board in executive session that I am not at luxury right now at sharing, but I want to say some information that has been shared right now is inaccurate about stalling or not elevating information. Moving forward, I really ask for your assistance that we build a resilient organization that recognizes who can be eligible as an officer, who can be eligible as an ex officio representative, how we manage our caucus representatives with pathways for leadership, and how we support our regionally elected members and how those work together. I believe we have about 40 minutes. That will be very valuable for us to discuss that as we move forward. And I think that's the topic of the business. That's not the first time we discuss it. And I want to recognize that members of this committee and members of the board wanted to speak of it, including myself, and did elevate it. We did get counsel on it. We did get information that is pending investigation on some information that you were not exposed to. And that's the limits where I have to stop in a public meeting. Just to make sure where we are right now, I have full trust in every individual on this screen or who's participating in this meeting and in our board that you have the best intentions to move us forward and you're doing your best so we can make the best decisions to ensure our committees and board is working well. So I just want to call the elephants in the room. Trust making the best decisions is a commitment of each one of us, and I can see us get there. So apologize, Linda. I did not intend to interrupt you. Just want to make sure the intent of the president, immediate past president, or all board members who are in this committee are clear. We want to make sure this organization works. So with that, I appreciate your grace for me sharing that. I do have some comments about officers and ex officio representatives and caucus representatives and regional members that I would like to share with you, but I want to hear from everybody if they have any proposals. And I believe our time will be very well spent if we talk about that. And with that, I yield.
Jeff, I think you were next.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Sammy. And I think one of the things I want to say too is a perfect example of our working agreements. And if, as you know, for those of you in the other room, at the request of Emily, Sammy and I did probably about 5 hours of mediation, Sammy. I think it was about 5. And worked out, got a lot of stuff that was taken care of. But I guess one of my concerns, I think, Sammy, it is not under your leadership, but under some of our situations in the past, is I think when we look back on our past and how do we handle decorum and how do we handle situations, you know, you and I have worked out a lot of our stuff, and I really appreciate that. I think that one of my concerns is when we look at, you know, when I asked a policy question and asked for clarification, and what I got from other people during that meeting does not within the board operating agreements, and no one spoke up, right? And so you keep on asking this call and you saying, hey, we need it's everyone's call. And I guess that one of my questions is, you know, when some of us are pretty articulate in focusing our questions and concerns on policies and focusing on procedures and protocols. But then what happens when we have our working agreements and we're going to be focusing on situations and focus on kids. And then we keep on having those jabs. And then no one says anything. And I guess that's ultimately one of my concerns is, yes, I appreciate that it's all of our responsibility, but then we keep on being told there's nothing we can do about it because it infringes on people's free speech. So that is one of my concerns that's there. I guess my other concern is I'm really looking at 411, and maybe this is a Haley or maybe this is a Bob conversation, but I'm looking at one of our situations we're in where it says that, and I think this is where the trust issue is there. And thankfully, as Sammy pointed out, it was not, we're not talking anything current. But I'm looking at one of our situations where we involved in investigation and that information wasn't shared to the overall board for months, like literally months afterwards. But the last sentence of that says, the actions of the executive committee shall be reported to the board by mail, email at the next board meeting. And so I guess this goes back to my question that I asked too, is when can the executive committee decide things at will? And then when is it appropriate to let them know immediately as that bylaw? And then when is it expected that we may not know until months later? And I guess that's one of my areas of and I asked at a Endeavor meeting, I was told that it wasn't the appropriate context to Bob. But I guess it's not clear to me is when is executive committee the one that ultimately has a say? When is the last sentence invalid? And it's okay for the executive committee to make decisions and not tell us for 4 or 5 months later. And when do we have to make decisions are up to the full board?
Can I speak to that? And maybe I want to lean on Bob and clarification.
Okay, and Sammy, I just want to say I love you, man. And we've had a lot of good conversations. Thanks. But I got to tell you that when you step in every time, I want to ask Bob and I want to ask Haley. And I appreciate you so much, sir. But this is one of the things I think that people misinterpret your intention because it comes across as you running the meeting. And I know that's not your intention, but it comes across that way. And so I really would like to hear Bob. I would love to hear Bob. Well, because I asked the question to Bob.
Sounds good.
You rejected. So
sounds good. Jeff, sorry to interrupt. I am the presiding officer. And I thank you now for being clear that your question is to Bob, and I'll hand the question to Bob. Sometimes I take the responsibility on answering questions, and I'll leave it to Bob to answer.
So, and I might need help to make sure I hit all of the points that, and Greg seems to have or Jeff seems to have disappeared from the meeting.
He did. I'll try to get to see if.
Yeah. So why don't I wait until he's back?
Yes.
Is anyone else in the queue besides myself while we're waiting for Jeff?
I could probably ask my question as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
Chrissy, you were first, so why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so I have, just as we're talking about ex officios being officers, I think the one concern that I have is we just basically, when we were going through all of this, we said, you know, there's some ex officio members that never show up to our meetings at all. And so to not have a policy in place that, you know, I would be very sad as a member of the board if an ex officio member that never came to our meetings all of a sudden wanted to run for president. So I guess I just feel like there needs to be a few more guardrails around that status, so that we don't have just, you know, somebody who's really not in tune with our board becoming our president. It just does not seem like a great idea. But again, I'm sorry that I don't understand that process as well as I maybe should, but that's my concern, you know, with just kind of not having more of a guardrail around who becomes officers for the board. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And at some point here, I'd like to get an opportunity to speak on that topic, to see if I can help frame that for the group.
You want to go ahead now, Bob?
Looks like Jeff's coming back. So which one do you want me to take first? Should I go ahead and hit Jeff's points?
Mm-hmm.
And Jeff, I might need your help in going back and making sure I hit all of the points that you raised. The one thing that jumped out at me was the question of timing of reporting back from the executive committee. And you're absolutely right that the bylaws as they're currently stated do not specify any sort of, you know, any set time frame. And so one of the options available to the committee here today, and as you work through these, is if you think that there should be more specific requirements around that, this would be the time to propose what you think that should look like. And I would expect that Haley or I would help put that into writing so that that could be part of your proposal to the full board for amendments. Any questions on that?
Yeah, so I guess, is that situational though still? Because I'm thinking back, one of our things that you mentioned a long time ago is that, you know, we're dealing with a situation where the board wasn't notified at all. And so is that a situational thing, or is it always the expectation in the bylaws that we're going to find out by the next meeting?
Well, that is for the board ultimately decide what it wants the bylaws to say. And so what happens, I know you've raised the issue of enforcement quite a bit, and I think we probably need to spend a little time on that. So I'll just again say, if this group wants to recommend to the board that it amend the bylaws to put specific timing requirements around reporting, it can do that. And then if the executive committee for some reason doesn't follow that, then the board during its normal proceedings would have the opportunity to do whatever it wants in terms of responding to a failure to comply with the bylaws. That could be somebody just standing up at the meeting and saying, I want to raise this. Please do better. From that all the way up to, if the votes are there and the board wants to make a motion to remove officers because they failed to meet that requirement, the board could take that action. So there's a wide variety of options available to the board in the event that it doesn't feel like the executive committee is meeting its obligations under the bylaws as they currently exist, or how they might be amended in the future.
Is there any situation that you or also Haley foresee where like 2 weeks is not enough time to get the full board aware of a situation? I mean, is 2 weeks a safe, 10 business days a safe timeline? Or Emily as well?
If I'm talking about from a policy standpoint, that's just fine. I think that Haley and Emily would have to speak just operationally, whether that's.
And I would say business days is important because I think of no school November, right? And all those other days, like December's rough too. So if it was business days versus 2 calendar weeks, that seems like it would give you a little bit more flexibility.
I think that does seem reasonable. I think, you know, it depends on, and this was actually a conversation I was hoping to have on Friday around what the board's expectation is between notifying and transparency. And that's just a conversation that I think we need to have, because sometimes when you're trying to weigh out those decisions between just notifying and not having any additional information to provide can sometimes cause a little bit of instability versus the executive team having some time to confer on situations. So it's really hard to say like, yes, 2 weeks will work in every single possible scenario. But I think if we had a like shoot for, or, you know, the expectation is type of language would be helpful, because I think you just can't, you know, predict every possible situation.
Yeah, understand. I mean, I work in education, so I totally understand. I guess the other follow-up question for Bob or Emily is, how do we make it clear what it takes or the procedure to get the board requested special meeting? Because we have 20%, but there is no protocols anywhere that's clear on how do you get that 20%. And I know we can't just send an email to every board member, because then that's a potential, you know, a public meeting violation. So do we need to outline that in some sort of protocol or policy, or is that a bylaw? And how do we elicit that 20% to get those people to request a meeting? Because I think that can help with a lot of confusion. And also, I guess there's a perception of lack of trust just because the policy and protocol wasn't clear.
I don't know if I have a different view on this than others do, but I do not think it's a public meetings violation for board members to reach out to each other with requests for support to schedule a special meeting. Now you shouldn't be deliberating on the subject matter of it, you know, the merits of the item that you want to take to the board for a decision, as long as you limit it to would you join me in requesting a special meeting on this topic, and leave it at that, you're fine from a public meeting standpoint.
Perfect, because I know that's exactly what Linda did, and the conversation was stopped. And so that was my concern is, how do we make that process clear? And I think that will help with a lot of emotions and stuff in the future. So is that, if we don't have to do that in bylaw, is that something then we could put on the operating agreements or somewhere else, Haley or Emily, so it's clear? Because that isn't clear anywhere, and I think that's where a lot of frustration comes in. It's because there's no mechanism explaining how to work that process.
Yeah, I think it would be more appropriate in a protocol or a policy, not in the bylaws for that
Correct.
level.
I agree.
But yes, that is something that we could bring forward.
And what Bob said is clearer, because what happened the first time around was people were, I think, thought they were requesting the same things, because it's also very clear that there's one agenda item for a special meeting, and people were requesting all different things. And so there wasn't ever a point in time where we had 6 people requesting the exact same thing for one special meeting. And so it became very convoluted in that versus what Linda submitted. It was very clear and everyone was included in that, and it was one request.
Well, and I think the thing that helped with that second one is that at least I was able to offer some feedback on what I did. And so then that way it was easier the second round too. So, all right, thank you.
So then I think the next subject that had come up while Jeff was out was just this topic of what's been described as ex officio members becoming officers. And I'm going to ask the committee to kind of stop thinking about it that way. And I know that's going to be hard because I think that's the way that this topic has been articulated for several months now, at least among those who are concerned about it. And there's a distinction in there that's missing, and that's what I want to emphasize today. When the question came up about the interpretation of the current bylaws and whether they would allow for the board to elect Sammy as president-elect initially. And my interpretation of the bylaws on that topic was provided first to Jim Green, and then we've been through some processes, and that's been shared with the group, and hopefully everybody here is aware of that. I want to emphasize that the reason that under the current bylaws it was recommended that Sammy was eligible, or a person in Sammy's position was eligible, was because the bylaws currently don't put any limits on who the board can decide to elect as its president. So eligibility was not based on the fact that at that point he was an ex officio member. Eligibility was because the board under these bylaws is given the power to make anybody that it wants to make president. And so what we've done in these proposed revisions is address one issue, but not the other. The one issue that we have proposed that you deal with is to create more clarity around the fact that what we've called the ex officios are not actually members of the board, they are just advisors. And so you have that in your amendments right now, and it sounds like everybody's comfortable with that. That's going to come to play down the road when you get to another issue that I know has been a subject of interest to this group, which is who should be attending executive sessions and who shouldn't be. And so you'll now have a little more clarity around who's on the board and who's not. And the board can make decisions as it goes forward as to who it involves in its executive sessions. Okay. What the amendments that have been proposed to you at this point have not addressed is the question of who's eligible to be an officer of the organization. That's for this group to decide what it wants to recommend to the full board. And if this group wants to recommend to the full board that only regional directors are eligible to be elected to the position of president-elect or any of the other officer positions, then what we need is your direction on that so that we can draft it up for you. If you want to say that ex officio advisors are eligible as long as they attend a certain number of meetings, and for Jeff's benefit, that's I'm riffing off of something that Chrissy brought up. You have the power to suggest that to the board, but that's what we need from you from either this meeting or the next one is your decision on a policy basis as to what you want to recommend for a revision to the bylaws so that we can help you draft the language that gets there.
Thanks, Bob. I think the other confusion in this situation too was the eligibility, and I'm trying not to use names, but I think this is a really unique situation because he already said that he was the president of the People of Color Caucus. That's listed in 3.5.3, which means that that person's part of the board, right? And then, but I think the hard part is what does it look like? And this is going to be a good question too for people then from the World Caucus, if whoever, like I know that person's in that role, but that's a 1-year term. But if they get elected to a 3-year position, I think that's the concern is that you have people who are part of the board, but they're only in that role for 1 year. But then does that mean they're automatically going to be on the board in some sort of extra state when they no longer hold that position that they held in 3.53? And I think I completely agree with you, the ex officio part. But I also think 353 also needs to be addressed with the officer, because that's ultimately, I think, where the confusion was on this situation. Not so much on the ex officio is how do we include people as officers when they're technically only on the board for 1 year and then everyone else is on for more than 1 year? Because potentially someone could be not an elected official, right, or appointed official, but be on the board 2 years after they held the role where they were eligible.
That's right. Yeah, and what I would, my advice to this group on that is figure out what pool of people you want to draw from for officer positions, and then we'll figure out how to craft it to deal with the situation that you just described, which is exactly right. You could have a situation where if you wanted to draw from the caucus representatives, you could have a situation where that person is elected to the position of president-elect and then is going to have 3 years of service that extends beyond their service as a caucus representative. We can help you work through that if that's.
Yeah, my recommendation that would be just the people that are elected, because I think that once we create these extra opportunities, and nothing pertaining to our current situation, but it really offers a perception of special rules for special people, right, and things like that. And I think if it's people who are elected to more than 1 year term, I think that will solve a lot of the frustration. But that's just my thought. I don't want to speak for the group, but I think that it should be just the people that are in that role for more than 1 year personally.
I want to jump in just because this is a follow-up, and I'm sorry to everybody who has their hand raised. First of all, Bob, thank you. That is literally the first time that somebody has explained this in a very clear way. So really what you're saying is if enough of us went out and found somebody off the street and we're like, hey, do you want to be the president of OSBA at this moment, we could absolutely do that.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the problem.
That's correct. And I just want you to know that that's not unusual.
Yeah.
That
Okay.
Oregon state law specifically allows that. For nonprofit corporations.
That's
Yes.
really helpful, because I was wondering that too. Because as a local board member, you can't do that. I don't believe, but maybe
Correct.
we can, and I just don't know it.
That is correct.
And I do want to say just one other thing, and this is, I think where my frustration has lied, is that I literally asked this exact same question years ago. And if somebody would have just said to me, this is the law and this is what our bylaws said, I think a lot of things could have gone by the wayside, but not a single person ever got back to me with what you just said, Bob. And the information has not changed. So I just, and this is, who knows, whose job that was at that time. I don't know. But I think we just need to be very thoughtful about when people ask questions, really trying to address them if we can, because like I said, I asked this question years ago when I first got on the board. And if this succinct answer you just gave had been given, that would have been great knowledge to have. So I appreciate that, Bob. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we have 13 minutes left and 4 hands raised. Jackie, you've been waiting patiently.
Linda's also waited, so I've been talking. Linda's also waited, so so I don't care who goes. So
Go ahead,
I
Jackie.
don't care who goes. All right. Issue, and this is the Bob question, Bob. And I want to be very careful because of session issues. But the executive committee when we were in executive session and when we were discussing the issues, we never were notified or discussed as to why we needed to be doing some kind of negotiations. And so the executive committee going ahead and taking the role of how we're gonna handle the previous director and when I'm in negotiations with my board,
Jackie,
the
Jackie, can you allow me to pause? And I just want to check in, Jackie. Sorry, could you pause? And I want to check in
Sure.
with Bob. Are we in a privileged conversation, or can Jackie continue to speak?
Well, we're not in a privileged conversation right now, but I'm not sure that Jackie's going into privileged information.
No, I'm not going to. What I'm
Sorry,
saying,
Jackie.
going to say is when I'm on a board, my board. No, I'm not going to. And I'm on the negotiating. I go to the board and they decide the parameters. They understand the whole process and they give the negotiating direction. And I don't believe we have been given that role in having giving the executive committee any kind of direction. They're just giving us information what they're going to do and no rationale. So that's it.
So I guess trying to apply that to what this group is doing here today, what I would say is if this group thinks that there needs to be a change to the description of the role of the executive committee, then we need to have your guidance and we need to have the full group weighing in on what it thinks those changes need to be. And then we'll help you with the drafting of that.
Thanks, Bob. Yes. And so we've got 10 minutes now. And so we're going to continue listening to comments and concerns. But I think what we're going to ask you to do between this meeting and the next one in May is think about changes that you'd like to see in the bylaws to address these issues and email those to myself and Sammy and Emily, and we can bring things back to you in May to consider. So just think about that. And then I will go to Greg.
Okay, this is about the question of eligibility for not only to be on our board, but to be an executive on the executive committee. And that is, my opinion is that if you aren't elected a director, and that makes it very specific, if you aren't elected as a director of one of those 22 directors or 21, however many we have for regions, if you are not a regionally elected director, you are not eligible to go, and you cannot attend an executive session because they have no decision. They cannot make a decision outside the executive session. So my opinion is that if you're not a regionally elected official, you are not eligible to serve on the executive committee and you cannot attend executive sessions.
So there's one point of clarification I need to add on that, which may be a little bit of pushback. I do want to make sure everybody understands that under the bylaws as they're currently written, the 2 representatives from the caucuses are full board members and have all of the rights of regionally elected board members. So they occupy a position that is different from the ex officios. And I just want to make sure everybody is cognizant of that distinction.
And I am saying that they should not be a director. They should be an ex officio. They're a liaison to a department underneath OSBA. They are not OSBA as far as I would see it.
So Greg, are you suggesting changing 353? Because I think that's what Bob is trying to point out, is 353 is clear that they are voting members of the board for the 1 year that they're on term, right, Bob? That's it.
That is correct.
Yes, my recommendation is that they be ex officios, not directors.
Sammy.
So thank you. All I'm taking notes of questions or even some thoughts about where to move forward. So I'm going. Sorry, go ahead.
Excuse me, this has happened more than once, and I refuse to be continued overlooked.
I did not see your hands. I don't think we saw your hands up. I will refrain from commenting further. Linda, thank you for interrupting.
Well, I
Please, you are recognized.
I'm sorry, I thought she had me in the queue. I let Jackie go. So,
All right. Go
I
ahead,
would like
Linda.
to. Okay, thank you. I'm gonna let my hand down as I talk. So, I've listened to all the concerns. I know we still got a couple more things on the agenda that I would like to be carried over to next business as far as this eligibility ex officio, the caucuses and the audit budget of the caucuses and the goals and objectives, as well as the Zoom protocol. So I'm following up, and I would like to just second strongly to help us get out of this situation. It seemed like it's coming up a lot, is that who's eligible and who's not. And I have to second what Greg is saying. And I say this specifically to you, Bob, because that's my only understanding of the board of directors for OSBA, is that the people's on the board are the people selected by their district and their regions, and they're the board of directors representing their regions and their school districts. And those are the individuals that can hold office as we elect them. So I'm with Chrissy, as here I was blessed that was my understanding, but then it's not. And where do we go from here to get back on track? I appreciate you guys listening and listen to all the feedback, and I'm gonna be short so that we can move forward. But that is a stickler item that needs to be clarified and cleared in our bylaws, and the rest of the conversation can go on to items, Sammy, for next agenda, if you don't mind, because we're not going to finish the other two things that Jackie brought forward.
Thank you. If you don't mind, please write them down. I'll expect an email from you, so I make sure I capture that accurately.
I'm gonna put them in chat to you right now.
If you don't mind, through an email, because the chats might disappear. Thank you.
I'm gonna text it to your personal phone.
Email, please.
Time. Okay. You'll get it all in every way. I'll make sure you get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Tahir.
Jackie?
Okay. I'm wondering that I'm just wondering if we could sitting in Pistol River and trying to decide how I would like to see the executive committee work. I'm not sure I have enough information to even know what they're all the things they're doing. So and working with staff, if there's some of us that would want to reach out and see if we can just have, and I know you're so busy, but us doing this in isolation is going to get us back to where we are right now. And I think if we could just get in little groups and do some thinking together out loud, we could make the meetings, these issues go faster.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, because this will probably come up in future conversations, I just wanted to clarify something that Greg said around the caucuses being a division of OSBA and not the board. And just to clarify, they are definitely under the board. The bylaws that they have are in alignment with the OSBA bylaws and are set up to be an independent body of OSBA. So while they're staffed similar to these committees are with OSBA staff, they're definitely not sort of another division of the OSBA team. They're definitely set up to be self-governed.
Thank you. All right, Sammy, we've got 2 minutes. Do you want to propose next steps? We have our next meeting scheduled for May 29th.
May 29th. So my proposal is for us probably to have a summary of agenda of topics mentioned and whether we have a clear direction or maybe question marks on where to move forward. And ask members of this committee if you can write down any additional thoughts that we did not get to. Share those. I took some notes, but I think we still need to have more clarity on how to move forward on several of them. I'll do my best to summarize this with staff, summarize your notes with staff. If you have agenda items you want to share as well, in addition, we'll have them. I know there is so much discussion needed on executive committee powers, decisions and timelines and notices. We have discussion around officers' eligibility, who can be an officer and if we should change that. We had discussion around the ex officio representatives. We had discussion on caucus representatives, and if there should be a path for leadership, or even if there should be a continuation of their status as enshrined in the bylaws and the resolutions that authorize those caucuses. So with that, I believe the next steps probably is for us to hear from you about your anything we missed from this discussion. I believe it might be very prudent for us, Haley, to have a bullet items of what we have heard and maybe share it back with the committee. And then the committee say, you missed something, or maybe I have an opinion about topic 5. So we hear from everyone and then we have a summary. Here's the 7 topics we heard from everybody. And here's the 2 different directions. So on the May meeting, we have clear list of topics and clear 1 or 2 or 3 possible pathways under each topic. How does that look like for everybody? Does that sounds like a good path, or am I missing anything? And I'll recognize you, Jeff, if there's no objection for this path. Are we good with this pathway? Emily?
I just have one recommendation that in that list, we could also recommend if something that is on that list should maybe be in policy versus within the governance committee as a discussion. There was 2 there that definitely have a place somewhere else within how we structure things.
Sounds good. Yeah, absolutely. Without objection. Jeff, please.
So the only other thing I would add there that I heard from people is should OSBA be paying for ex officios to attend our meetings as well? Because since they're there as an advisor, I think people were concerned about the cost of having to pay for ex officios, hotel rooms, gas, things like that. And so not to exclude people, but that was something I heard most people saying is, why are we paying them to come? Their organization should be paying for them to attend. And so that's one point I wanted to share.
Thank you. And by paying, you mean reimburse for expenses rather than stipend.
Correct. We are OSBA is paying for their attendance, such as hotels, mileage, things like that. And I think that's a concern is when money's tight, we can use that money elsewhere.
Noted. Thank you. We are out of time. I just want to take a few seconds of points of privilege. Please write me if you feel you're missing information or there's an information you need to hear. I would like to read from you. Please put it in writing so I can actually share it with those who can answer that question and we provide clarification. You got my personal commitment. We're going to move forward stronger and better because of those tough conversations. So thank you all. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. If there's no objection, we will adjourn at 2:01. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Productive meeting.